Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast, which is powered by SIG. And I really appreciate the time that you take out of your week to listen to the show and for the feedback, the ratings, and the reviews that you share, both to me, but also to my guests. You know, I really love to hear about the conversations that develop out of those interviews. And it just really, it makes such a difference when I hear from guests that you've been interacting with them. So I want to thank you for doing that before I start the show today. My guest on the show is Brian Bancroft, and this is Brian's second appearance on the podcast. Brian and I actually sat down back in episode 126, and I enjoyed that conversation so much. I've really been eager to find an opportunity for us to record another show together, and so that's what we were able to do this week. Just a little bit of background on Brian. So Brian has a wealth of experience across and outside the procurement function. He's enjoyed a number of roles, including Senior Director for Indirect Procurement and Shared Services, and then CPO of Asia Pacific and Africa regions for the Kellogg's company. And then most recently, he was VP of North America Indirect Procurement, and then moved over to be VP of Direct Procurement for the Coca-Cola Company. Well, since our last talk, Brian has actually made the move to Church and Dwight, and Brian is now Chief Procurement Officer at Church and Dwight, and he's embarking on another procurement transformation journey. And so it's procurement transformations that are the subject of our conversation, where I asked Brian to share his learnings. He's really executed a number of transformations around the world, and so I wanted to know what are some of his lessons learned, and what should we really be thinking of as the kind of foundational pillars of a procurement transformation journey. And so before I went there, I started by asking Brian a question that I often ask my guests, and that's, did Brian choose procurement, or did procurement choose him?
You know, it was interesting because I was late to the procurement field, so it clearly chose me. You know, I had originally been in construction after high school, actually at the tail end of high school, and worked in construction for about 8.5 years. Married, had a child, but about 5 years out of high school, I enrolled in college, and I went through night school for about 8 years. But towards the tail end of my undergraduate, when I had still about a year to go, I got an opportunity to get a job at Unisys. So at the time, they were a $7 billion technology company, hardware and software. And I didn't know anything about procurement. Right. Yet I was given the opportunity to join them as a buyer and handle facilities contracting for them. So it was a really easy and kind of seamless, you know, change and move. And then I really learned there a lot about the principles of procurement. We had begun to do category management there through a new vice president that joined. So early on, I was exposed to a lot of the concepts of procurement, the specific processes, and over that initial time period, I was there for about 2 years, ended up learning a lot during that time.
What was it about it that made you stick with it? You know, that you took this role you didn't know anything about, because that's not an unusual kind of origin story. I had pretty much exactly the same, at least in terms of not knowing what a buyer was. And it's something that just makes you stay around. I just wonder if there was something particular or a moment that you can remember, or something that made you think, you know what, this is for me, I really like this.
Yeah, I guess, you know, there was actually a couple things, you know, that there was no day the same, so every day was different, you know, kind of different challenges, you know, that would come up. And I found that I like to negotiate. I like to, you know, be kind of internally focused, you know, people in the organization to kind of understand business requirements, but then really kind of engaging suppliers and you know, doing negotiations and I felt that, you know, that really gave me a sense of excitement, and I kind of thrived in that environment. You know, and I as I learned more about, you know, the field of procurement, I saw a real kind of long runway ahead. a lot of opportunities to grow. But it was totally different for me, going from the world of construction into a corporate environment.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there's just a whole host of differences. So there was a real steep learning curve for me. But, I kind of got through that first year, and then I knew I was kind of off to the races.
So when you talk to folks when you're now hiring, and you talk to folks from outside procurement, it could be somebody who's perhaps in college or even somebody who's in a different function. What are some of the ways that you try and sell or the attractions you try and position to somebody of coming and joining a team in procurement where they may not have thought about that before?
Yeah, some of the things I talk about are the career path.
Yeah.
So that, this is a very rewarding field. People are well compensated when you do well, when you get a lot of experience. So, there's a long runway. Supply chain is really a focus in companies today, and I think procurement is really, really a key part of that. Mm-hmm. But also when you look across, the entire portfolio, and probably more so on the indirect space, you're able to get across the entire business and learn a lot, from that perspective as well. So unlike the direct space, which is much more, internally focused, plant focused, fewer suppliers, more of a financial exercise. I think if you can deal with the stress and the commodity pressures, you do really well. Mm-hmm. On the indirect side, it's much more about influencing and again, getting across the business, and also as you work with the other functions, you can also kind of expand your horizons there. So you have a lot of responsibility within a company. You get exposed to a lot, and there's a great career path. Also, the other thing is early on in your career, and I think this applies to other functions in the company, is that when you're not married, children, have all those responsibilities, and you're mobile, you're able to really move around with some of the larger organizations and get even international experience.
It's funny you say both of those things. Like the responsibility for me was, I couldn't believe how much responsibility somebody was giving me so early in my career when I probably didn't feel like I'd done much to deserve it. And that was something to grow into, obviously. And then being able to travel the world, essentially, was so rewarding and thrilling, where I never really thought I'd have that opportunity. That's what appealed to me for sure.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's being at the right place at the right time. When I started with Unisys, that was a company that was the output of Burroughs and Sperry, so almost the IBM equivalents way back in the day. Mm-hmm. And after 10 years of a merger between those companies, they had about 140,000 employees when they started. They were down to less than 35,000 when I was there. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of very interesting dynamics within a company. So me coming in as a 20-something-year-old and not knowing how organizations work and really not being aware of what they've gone through, I just jumped right in. Right. And as a result of that, the leadership saw me as somebody that wasn't kind of influenced by the past, but was really going to challenge a lot of things. So a lot of opportunities presented themselves to me, and I took advantage of them.
So we recorded a show last year. I think I was looking in the archives, and I think it was last March or so. And I know that since we did that, you've actually taken on a new role. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit about what it is that you're doing today.
Sure. So in August of last year, after being at Coca-Cola down in Atlanta, I ended up joining Church and Dwight, where I am now. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't really know Church and Dwight, but we make so many different products. One of the most well-known is Arm & Hammer, Waterpik and Nair, and so many others. But I joined them as their Chief Procurement Officer. And the role had been vacant for almost a year since the last CPO moved on to a different company. And one of the things, it brought me back, full circle. So I grew up in the Pennsylvania area, mm-hmm. and, it brought me back home after about 20 years of traveling around the globe. Church and Dwight's about a $4 billion company, a consumer products industry. We're growing, very fast, doing well financially. We've been on the acquisition mode. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about the company is it was founded in 1846, so it's been around quite a long time. And, as I mentioned, Arm & Hammer, Trojan, First Response, Nair, Spin Brush, Orajel, Waterpik. I mean, they're some of the brands that we have, and that's one of the things that attracted me to the company. So, the history of the company, the very strong brands, the financial performance, and most importantly, the culture. Mm-hmm. So we're generally at an inflection point where, we operate kind of small for a very large company. $4 billion is a large company, but it allows us, really to connect internally. We're a very lean organization, which again, provides for a lot of opportunities, for growth and also to make an impact mm-hmm. that you can, really notice. So when I, yep.
No, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, so, when I came in, I met a fantastic group of dedicated and talented, individuals within the procurement group. But over the next 5 months, which is what I was brought in to do, and I've done elsewhere, is really kind of assess the procurement function, and through a lot of, internal perspectives, within the company, within procurement, as well as some external benchmarks and diagnostics I had done, I realized there was really an opportunity for change. And there was also a big pull within the organization. So, one of the really rewarding things is when I presented the strategic plan to my boss, who's the head of supply chain, and then our CFO and CEO, it was fully endorsed mm-hmm. at the end of that meeting. Big investment, in the procurement function, and obviously a big pull from the organization. One of the things that I kind of have done in a number of the last transformations I've led is partner with a third party, in this case GEP, which really allowed me to do a number of things, which applies here. We have a really very long way to go to even get close to best in class. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the foundational elements of capability building, technology, driving insights, even an understanding of, a strategic sourcing process really isn't there. So while we build that foundation, and, I've gone through here of some organizational changes. So as we build the foundation, we're able to bring in some really talented individuals to partner up with our existing talent, and then grow that talent, and also, through this third party, it's really about the value that you deliver quickly. We're able to also drive, significant early on results, mm-hmm. and it's early, but it's been a tremendous ride so far.
So I want to go a little bit deeper into the transformation in a little while, and I'm going to hop around a little bit because there are a couple of questions before I do that I want to ask, but I wanted to just pick up on something you just said about, you made this statement about best in class and, kind of measuring and monitoring where you are against the best in class. And I just wonder, how do you actually kind of compare, and this doesn't necessarily have to be in your individual case, but as you're thinking about procurement transformation, what are the considerations that go into what you're trying to achieve? What does best in class in your world look like? Because that may look very different than best in class to somebody else.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of threw that out there, and there are a lot of ways to measure it, right? Mm. So, we assessed ourselves, from a stakeholder perspective, but that was really interesting because we had, half the people that responded, and we had a very large group of respondents that said we're meeting expectations, and then half of them said that we were not meeting. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing delving in was a lot of those, or a significant number of those that said we're meeting, had a different perspective of where we would have liked to be. Yeah. Meaning that, hey, go save money, deal with the issues, kind of execute what we need you to do. So that's certainly not where we want to be and where we're headed. And so kind of digging into the internal perspective is one thing, and kind of changing, the value proposition to the company and then how you're perceived. And I think that's it's not easy to quantify, but you know it when you got a lot more pull and you can influence the business. So I think that, say, quote unquote, best in class procurement organizations, they all aspire to be there. But when I take a look at some of the measurements, the benchmarks and then the diagnostics, one of the diagnostics we did was, on basically a whole host of measures and elements of procurement that would enable you to get there, to be best in class from an actual output standpoint. And I had a number of people in the procurement group do this diagnostic, which was, what is important to get you there, and how are we doing? So basically, you do the 1 to 4, 1 to 5 kind of maturity model. And we're basically a 1 across the board, maybe some 2s in a couple areas. And that true best in class, you'd need in an organization like us, you need 500 people in procurement to get you there, and we're never going to do that. Yeah. So we're kind of looking on a 5 scale of being at that 3.5, which is where a lot of really good procurement organizations are at the end of 3 years. Yeah. So, whether it's a return on investment of the procurement group, the stakeholder satisfaction, savings rates, true spend under management, those types of measures, we also were able to quantify where we are. And, the commitments that I've made through the strategic plan significantly, increase that delivery.
Yeah, and then I guess you can also then pick within those. You don't need to be a 5 across the board, but there may be one thing as you continue to grow and evolve that the business really, where you can add the biggest impact. And it might not even be something that you set out at the beginning, but you're getting the foundational level across everything, and then focusing on the 2 or 3 things that enable you to really make a difference and make an impact, as opposed to just trying to focus on everything, especially with having constrained resources.
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that we're doing that came actually out of, we did the basic SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm. We had a couple rounds of that, at least so, the procurement team could provide a lot of input. And there was a lot of transparency, whether it was a stakeholder survey or external diagnostics, to the team of where we were kind of shaking out. In a way, it was depressing. There was feedback from the team like, "Oh, we're horrible," mm-hmm. but that's not the case whatsoever. It's kind of what has been recognized and expected in the past. Yeah. Team did really well, but there wasn't really an external perspective or where we really could get to, mm-hmm. and that capability building, the investment in people's capabilities had not been there before, but it was a real need, and that's one of the key pillars here. So, the output of this in terms of the foundation is, and other companies have done this, is, a competency assessment. So we've got a competency model that is, applicable to procurement organizations around the world, mm-hmm. but also is a little specific to us. Yeah. But we're not compromising on where the team needs to go. But, there will be a self-assessment, a manager assessment, and then the output really is, where are the couple areas of opportunity for each individual to grow in the coming year? Yeah. And this will be an ongoing thing of where we can invest in the talent here as we bring in new capabilities from the outside as well. The 3 areas that we've identified, and again, from the starting point, are just developing a long-term strategic plan. Yeah. For procurement, that had never been done here. So it was a year-to-year kind of execute to the business. Mm-hmm. So, that's been done, but it's really the content. And, the stakeholder engagement for us is critical. We have about $1 billion of indirect spend, and we've touched less than 10% of it.
Right.
And right out of the gate, which was, again, the benefit and my bias towards bringing in a third party is, in a couple months, we've made such inroads into many different areas, IT, marketing, that literally it would have taken us years to get into before, and we hadn't been involved in the past. So those partnerships have been established in certain areas, and again, we're kind of off to the races. And the other thing is, we're still going to staff back up, but we're going to be lean. And as we exit a third party in the future, we can always bring in supplemental staffing for newer, complex initiatives that we really don't want to have full-time people in place for.
But it allows you to. I'm loath to use the term quick wins, but I can't. Nothing else comes to mind. You're generating value quickly, aren't you? Through using people who are experts and who know that market particularly. So it justifies or provides a quick ROI to enable you to continue to build the program that you ultimately want to build.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having a conversation with one of our businesses, a newly acquired business, about ocean freight. Mm-hmm. And I said that, these third parties, I share the one we use, but, this one third party has 4,000 people that are only focused on procurement. Yeah. We have 4,000 people in the whole company.
Right.
We could have a person spend 1,000 years to try to understand a category. They probably won't get there. Yeah. So, we rapidly do things, we get insights, and we have others kind of picking up the ball, 95% of the work. But as we bring up our capabilities. So, probably like you say, quick wins. I always have this pet peeve about low-hanging fruit.
Right.
I've never found it with dollars on them. So you still have to do the work, but there are certain ways you could do the work without trying to start out from scratch.
Yeah. You mentioned something about, when you joined, that you had a really good group of dedicated, of talented professionals within the team. And it's interesting to me, that back, maybe it's in the past, maybe there's some organizations that do it. Well, in fact, I know there are, just from my experience. You come in to do a transformation and you look and think, well, everybody, because maybe the organization hasn't been getting the results they wanted, so everybody who is associated with that is bad. Let's bring in a whole new team, a whole new group that's good and is going to save the world. When the reality is, I found that so many times the team is there, they just haven't been given the tools or the confidence or the platform or perhaps the development opportunities to actually put into practice what it is that they need to put into practice to get those same results. I just wonder if that's something that you see when you embark on these transformation programs.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so easy to just, hey, you're all out.
Right.
We're going to get a whole new team. And that just isn't appropriate because, one of the things I always try to do is understand, mm-hmm. And the understanding here was, again, a lack of investment and different kind of expectations on a team. So even if somebody was coming from the outside of the company with a lot of experience, the longer that they were here, they kind of ultimately fit into that model. So they lost what they even had coming into the company, like why they were hired. Mm-hmm. So, but I also look at the attitude and aptitude. I think there are a lot of very smart people out there. There's a lot of people that have the aptitude to learn, but it's that attitude, mm-hmm. it's the attitude of the willingness to learn, the ability to deal with ambiguity and change, and kind of embracing it. And and that's what I kind of looked at when in any of these transformations and making a change. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to be providing to the team is very welcome and will help us, move the ball. But with that said, I kind of look at it as we're also, looking for A players.
Yeah.
Somebody had said to me once that, if you're fielding a brand new baseball team or a soccer team or, mm-hmm. or whatever your favorite sport is, who are you going to choose for that team? And, if you work with a blank slate, a whiteboard, and you have that opportunity, then you can kind of look at who are you going to put on a team. And that's what I did. And, most of the team is filled with, people that were here before I was here. And again, I think that attitude of being a team player, we have some very, very experienced people that have been in the industry a long time, and, they're open to learning too, and also sharing. So that's pretty fantastic from my perspective.
What kind of, as you drawing that blank slate and you're putting down your ideal team, what kind of diversity of thought or experience or mindset do you look for? Because I imagine we don't want to just put a team of A players who are all very driven and single-minded all in the same team together, because the need to have people with different skill sets are playing off of each other. So I'm just interested how you kind of approach the diversity that you can build into that.
Yeah, it's our CEO said to me once, when I joined, said, we're fielding a team too. We need a third baseman, a great third baseman. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like that for a couple different reasons, but it resonates because, you're not looking for all the same skill sets, the experience, even the approach. Because, for example, if you have somebody in procurement that is dealing with the plants, dealing with engineering, there's a certain style. It's very direct, it's very data-driven, it's, sometimes a bit confrontational. When you're dealing with the marketing folks, it's a little bit of a different approach. So, there can be some really subject matter expertise, experience you're bringing in, but the style of people and how they interact with people is really important. One of the things that I'm doing here, which might be counter to some transformations, is I'm bringing in some very seasoned people. Some that are, they've acknowledged themselves. They're looking for 3 more years. That's it. Right. 2 to 3 years, and they're retiring. Yeah. And some people might think, well, you're not bringing those people, those really experienced people in because you're looking long term.
Right.
I look at this that the next 2 or 3 years are critical. That if we make the progress, set the foundation, some of these individuals I'm bringing in, it's great. They're going to develop successors because we're bringing in new talent. We also have talent, and we're going to be in such a great place. So, that also fits in the dynamic of that, sports team analogy of having a very diverse group of individuals. One of the things I look at is, sometimes people look at diversity in one dimension, the background of individuals. But I look at it, obviously in this context, a lot broader from experience and styles, as I was saying. So when I was over in Asia, running Africa, Middle East, Asia, and Australia procurement for Kellogg's, I experienced more diversity over there than I had experienced anywhere else, even though the United States is a very, very diverse country. And, I think that, some time ago I may have shared this example that, when I had a team in India and a team in Japan, as well as many other countries, working within that diverse group was quite a challenge. And I think one of the greatest successes in my career, just because if you kind of know the nuances of this, you'd understand. I mean, in a way, it might be perceived as basic, of getting rice into Japan, or getting some of the packaging, from India into Japan. And quite a story behind that. And there was a bit of work to be done, but it was almost like that, the blind taste test on the Pepsi and Coke.
Right.
But, bringing in packaging or having things tested, but not exactly saying where they're coming from, and having, people look at things for what they are. And, there was a lot of skepticism when I was over there. I was an expat. People thought I'd be over there just a couple years and I'd be gone, like other people. But when I brought that team together and treated everybody equally, and everybody had a voice, and there's a lot of nuances within cultures around the world, people began to open up their minds and say, I'm really going to be a part of this. I really have a voice. And then when we started having success, that team thrived and flourished. And, probably one of the prouder transformations that I led.
Yeah, it's like your role is to almost coordinate or facilitate those conversations, isn't it? To encourage people to talk and collaborate and connect. And then once you've done that, you can kind of step backwards. But I always found, certainly, so I had a role when I was in India as well. And that was the biggest challenge, was getting people to talk. And once they do, you can kind of get out of the way.
Yeah, put away the preconceived notions, the biases, the things that you may have tried in the past didn't work. And, let's approach it. Let's approach it again together, and amazing outcomes.
So when you think about developing a transformation strategy, what are some of the things that you take into account in building that kind of first look?
Well, one of the things I try to do, obviously, before I've, come into a role, and as you know, I have moved from a number of different companies, is really try to assess the appetite. Mm-hmm. I mean, truly the appetite. Because, there are situations where, you talk to people and they really want to change. They see the need to change. They really understand the value, but they can't do it. The culture doesn't allow it. Or when, the plan comes forward, I can't make an investment, but could you do all that stuff? So, one of the things is really the appetite and the support for change. For me, I have a great boss, one of the best I've ever had. He is newer to the company as well, Rick Spahn. He's head of supply chain here, and he spent his career in Colgate. But making a connection with him and kind of understanding what he was trying to do was also very important. And again, I always fall back to the people, because regardless of the processes and the policies and the technology and all this kind of stuff, if the people aren't bought in, and like I said, you don't have a dedicated team that's willing to evolve and willing to learn, it's game over right there. Yeah. So, naturally, as I consider an opportunity, and fortunately, which is why I tell people as I'm recruiting them, is there's a supply chain is in demand. Procurement is in demand. Companies doing great, they need you. Companies not doing so great, they need you. Mm-hmm. So, there were opportunities for me, and some really, interesting opportunities. A lot more money, bigger profile. Mm-hmm. But this one was perfect. This one was perfect for many different reasons, and it was the appetite for change, the perceived support, and as I did the assessment, it came true in terms of that support.
Are there some things that I'm not sure if there's a magic or a process to it or not, and that's why I'm asking the question. You talked about the great relationship that you have and the appetite for change, and you right at the beginning you said when you presented your first plan, you walked out the room and everyone's approved that plan. What are the things that other people listening can learn to kind of apply to doing the same for themselves to really build that buy-in or alliance or whatever it may be with the senior leaders so they are supportive of what you're doing?
Yeah, what I found, and it came true here, it played out here, is that it's got to be data-driven. Mm-hmm. So I had joked around that we didn't just do a 360 on the group, we did a 720. There was, so much that I looked at from, the internal self-assessment, the stakeholder. We did a time study. We had external diagnostics. So we looked at this from so many different perspectives that when the plan was developed and I presented it, the upfront part was fact-based. It was data-driven. It was, here is where our competitors are. Here is where the market is. This isn't something that we're creating by ourselves. Yeah. This isn't going to be unique to us. Others have done it. I have been fortunate enough to have done it. And I think that was the key element here. The other thing is the beauty of Church and Dwight is we are nimble. Mm-hmm. We are flexible. We can move very quickly. When you look at some of our competitors, they're much larger. And I've been in some very large companies. You can't move as quickly. And then there's inertia. I think that, what I've experienced sometimes in the past is, regardless of how good your plan is, you're going to go back a couple times. It's just the nature of how things work.
Yeah.
Your plan could never be approved the first go around because it's almost perceived like, hey, we need to have you go back and do some things. But that data-driven approach and making sure that you get a lot of insights and a lot of perspectives is the foundation for developing the plan. Naturally, when you ask for something, you better give a lot more in return, and that's kind of the key element here as well. And it's got to be believable. So, hey, I'll give you, a 5 ROI, an 8 ROI.
Right.
Well, they don't know me. They don't know a lot of the leaders that come in. So how are you going to do that? And the how was more important than the what. So the path to get there, why belief, was a big thing. And then, what are the dependencies? So, yeah, I'm not just going to ask you for the money and I'm going to give you this in return, but I'm going to ask you for some other things. And it can't just be head nods. It can't just be the executive team saying, yeah, that's great.
Go do it.
It's got to filter down further.
And that's something I was going to follow up on, actually, is that we're so dependent upon the stakeholders that we work with to actually make a transformation a success, make anything we do in procurement a success. I wonder if there's things that you've done that have really helped you bring along particularly skeptical stakeholders to engage in what you're doing and feel like they're part of it and not be a roadblock or not be a not skeptic isn't the right word, because we can be skeptical but we can agree, but be somebody who is obstructive.
There's a couple things that come to my mind when you say that. One is, it's not like strategic plans haven't been done here,
right,
but there's a whole new set of leadership. From our executive vice presidents, there's half of them are newer to the company, and then from the vice president level, there are a number of us that are new. But I was kind of on the tip of the spear. I was the first one to bring forward the strategic plan, and because of how I kind of went about doing it, it served a little bit of a model for other functions. So very specifically, I met with HR. They're doing an evaluation. They're developing a strategic plan, and I've helped to inform that. So this is the first time for them. So not that they're going to replicate it, but the approach they're going to take is somewhat similar. The advantage of procurement, as we all know, is it's all about the money.
Yeah.
So the ticket to the game is, give me this, I'll give you this in return. The thing about other functions is that, it's not necessarily about saving money. It's a little bit different, so it's harder to quantify. The other point, to your question is, how to kind of build that credibility and not create bureaucracy and all that is, so we had very little, if any, interaction with, IT, HR, marketing, research and development here. As I said, we touched, less than 10% of the total spend. So through GEP, leveraging their subject matter experts, I facilitated the first meetings, created the opportunity. We would get in a room with, these functional heads and their leadership teams. And then I stepped out, so I set it up and I participated in those first meetings, but I am not sitting in every meeting. I'm not driving. The credibility's been established, and I love to sit back, kind of in the shadows. If you need my support, you need my help, great. Just tell me all the wonderful things you're doing, and that's actually playing out too, very quickly.
How are you integrating GEP, and it can be any third party, but how are you integrating them with your existing team so it feels like it's you're going to, I say going to market, but you're going to your stakeholders, you're going to your internal customers as one, as opposed to it being, here's a service provider, here's an internal person. Because one of the things my experience has been, I've delivered some outsourcing services, and it's really easy to outsource that stakeholder engagement, and then once a service provider is left, you're left with no relationship. So it's really important still to have at least some internal support, so that you're not completely giving that up to a third party.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So I've worked with so many different companies, McKinsey, PwC, Accenture, and then the GEPs and many others. And there's a little bit of a difference, So, some consulting companies come in from the top. And I've experienced that, you could save $100 million, $200 million, and they kind of identify those opportunities, but they're not necessarily there through the entire journey. Mm-hmm. And that creates actually some serious conflict and angst, that now the procurement group it's been put upon you. What I did here was looked at a number of different companies. I certainly have history with GEP at Kellogg's, but I looked at a number of different companies and said, who was the right fit? Because there are a number out there, but brought GEP in, initially for the opportunity assessment. So that was kind of the data analysis. And so it was pretty innocuous, to the procurement group, made a lot of sense. And then basically as I evolved through the organizational changes, which were significant, and brought them in, the touchy part is people feel a lot of different ways. People feel threatened that they're going to make me look bad or look stupid. I have to show how smart I am, and it's a conflict. So how I've done this here is, listen, they're integrated into the team. There are offshore resources in supporting, market analysis, some of the kind of heavy lifting on RFPs and all that. But I have a team here with GEP that are sitting with my team. Yeah. They're in cubes next to my team. Just, everybody's embedded. They're participating in meetings together. Certainly have them, leading certain areas, especially in the indirect space, because I'm going to staff up that organization over time. Mm-hmm. But there will be a knowledge transfer, and there's an expiration date. So kind of communicating to the team, if we tried to do it all ourselves, we would fail in this particular environment where we're heading. They're going to help us get there. There's going to be a knowledge transfer. It's going to be fantastic for procurement. They're sitting with us. Full transparency. It's not two teams, and then we'll set us up for success in the future. And at this particular point, again, it's early days, but very, very quickly, people are working really well together, and their brands. This is one of the things about my pet peeve is there are no consultants. They're not referred to as a consultant. Mm-hmm. GEP in a way doesn't exist here. It's Church and Dwight Global Procurement. Yeah. So you'll never see their logo on any of the material here, and basically everybody is on Church and Dwight email and basically operating under my my team.
Yeah, you just happen to have resources that come in from different areas, but you're one procurement.
Yep, and that's critical. Otherwise, like you say, who is, and that was what I encountered when I first came into Kellogg's. It was. It was a top-down driven $100 million project on Indirect, and there were two teams there after a couple of years. Yeah. So the critical thing was changing that significantly, so that really the ownership, the relationship, sustainability resided within the employees of the company.
Yeah. And that was my experience in delivering some of those similar services for another provider in the market as well, is that would so often happen. Sometimes the hiring organization would be managing by contract, the service provider. Other times they just didn't want to be too engaged and they kept a separation. And it works at the beginning, or perhaps it gives the illusion of working at the beginning because you're saving money, but it's not really sustainable. The other thing that you said that I think is really important is that, it's for a defined period of time. And so the service provider themselves knows that part of their role is to help with that knowledge transfer. So there's no incentive for them to try and keep things to themselves because they're wanting to, extend the engagement as it is, like for like out for another 2 years or 3 years or 5 years and make you completely dependent upon them. But that their role is to actually help you bring as much of this internally. You just need the help to get there.
Yeah, and that's perfect. I mean, it's how you frame up the relationship. So we have shared goals. We have one dashboard. There was discussion, which kind of makes sense about, well, what are they doing? What will they do and deliver, and what will you deliver? Well, it doesn't quite work that way because you're going to be so integrated. Now, we naturally want to get a return if you're getting any third party in there, but that's where the shared goals are. Yeah. And, when you have these in here, it's if all you're doing is say, I'm engaging you to save money, you're potentially going to have a lot of issues because the whole incentive is driving savings. It's not really building those stakeholder relationships. It's not knowledge transfer, and it's not hitting all the other things that are important, like risk management, innovation, supporting your supplier diversity program, and those things. So, that's one of the things I learned over time. Doing this multiple times of setting up the relationship and the expectations and truly integrating. And also, the approach here is, things change over time. Centralize, decentralize, outsource, insource. But the plan here is there is no outsourcing. We're not outsourcing it. And with the stakeholders, it is also a reinforcement that, they know, we're bringing in subject matter expertise through a third party, but we're really delivering this through procurement. And one of the things that came up recently, which was great, was, hey, it feels like they're selling us something. Mike, they're not selling you anything other than the procurement services. I've got it under my budget.
Yeah.
There is no upselling.
Yeah. We
got you covered. And I tell you, that was one of the concerns by other functions. I'm like, nope, we have all this covered. We're delivering this service to you, and again, it's been phenomenal.
As I think, I know that we're running out of time. There's a couple of questions I have that I want to jump back to in terms of your career journey, but there's just one more thing on transformation, and that's governance, and sustainability. So oftentimes we can do this in a little bit of our own silo, and sometimes, I've seen that it's because we're kind of fearful of putting ourselves forward. You put yourself into the limelight to be judged and measured. That also opens up, it's harder to paper over the cracks somewhat. So I'd love to hear your view on how you think of governance in terms of the entire procurement organization, and then, involving your leadership and your peers across the organization in that, so they all feel like they're part of something, as opposed to you just delivering something out of a black box to them.
Yeah, that question's got a lot of dimensions to it. One of the things that sometimes you evolve to is shared goals with other functions. Mm-hmm. We're certainly not there at this point because it's early days. That can kind of get you there in a way. But there's, in some cultures, they're risk averse. The risk versus reward is not there, so people don't want to stick their neck out. As I've led these transformations, the only way to actually get the support and make it happen is putting your neck out there. Mm-hmm. And so, I lead by example. I lead the team. They know I'm with them, and my neck is out the furthest. So, we have very specific metrics. Yeah. And the one thing about changing a perception of procurement is it goes way beyond cost savings and working capital improvement to a host of other areas. One is innovation. So we want to partner with marketing, the business, and R&D to unleash, some of our supplier innovation. But, again, it goes back to if you're going to do this, there is no option other than, put your neck on the line. And it's tough because, I'm doing something here that, is not necessarily out there with all the other functions. So now I've drawn a lot of attention into procurement. Mm-hmm. And that's actually besides bringing in a third party and all the investment. It's just I put metrics out there, so it's very easy for a lot of eyes to be on there and start questioning. Well, what about this? And you're missing this. It's the nature of the game, and it's early days, and I just know that over time, it'll be pretty interesting how we knock the ball out of the park. And, being a metric-driven function, I think is a lot more beneficial than, having just qualitative measures.
Yeah, and I guess it's also better to have people, and again, it goes to fear. This isn't necessarily natural or comfortable a lot of time, but it's better to have people know what you're doing and even see if you're not meeting your targets because you put them out there, that people are interested and feel vested in what you're doing, as opposed to nobody knows and so they don't really care. You want people to care rather than not care, even if they have a negative opinion sometimes.
Yeah, I was talking to HR and just recently, and we were talking about performance reviews, mm-hmm. and we're kind of evolving that. And within procurement, it was interesting when I came in because I wanted to review everybody's goals, and we just had their annual review. So I actually wanted to review every single employee's performance review, how their manager was evaluating them. And what I discovered, again, it kind of fits into the past, is a lot of qualitative measures or goals that aren't goals. Filling a position is not a goal. And then you look at how managers are handling it, and you could see that if a manager is putting 2 sentences into somebody's performance review, how does the employee really care as well? And I think that the career development and giving back to the individuals is critical. So we have overarching goals. We have very specific goals for individuals. There's a lot of consistency based upon the role in the organization. And some people in the procurement group are very concerned, very nervous about that, because now, again, they're going to be held to a high standard. But, again, it goes back to the fact that we're all in it together, one team, and we've got a dashboard, so right out of the gate, these metrics are very visible, but they're also visible to the team so that we know exactly where we stand. And I'm not putting out there, what Joe did and Frank did and Sally did. This is a team effort. And internally, we're looking at that. And it's really how to kind of help each other, because you have 10 projects, only 6 work out, and you've got to line up some others. And I think that's what the group is kind of looking at too, of how to delve into different areas. I've got a woman in the group, and she is in the Indirect procurement team, and she asks a lot of questions. And it's funny because I love it, but I told her that, in one of the discussions we had, I said, listen, I'm not playing poker, so when I meet with you, regardless of my tone, my facial expression, or my body language, keep asking the questions. And I like people like that, because either that's their style, they want to learn, they want to challenge, and I'm getting really the team to challenge more, because historically, the more senior you were, you gave direction to the people underneath you, and all they did was execute. So that whole model is being turned upside down as well. I mean, there's certainly protocols and managers, but I've got the team all in, regardless of how much experience or what their role is.
It's not necessarily a hierarchical decision-making structure, or that that it flows all the way downhill with nobody having the ability to actually input and challenge and question and bring their own ideas.
Yeah, I've said for a while, I said, God forbid everybody does what I say or what I think, because we're going to be in big trouble. The group think, I used to like to believe that I had all the answers and, it's great, I'm going to teach you and you're all going to do. That doesn't work. And there's so much experience and so much knowledge. We're just, again, the people that don't know asking the questions, you're going to be in such a better place. And frankly, it doesn't always work that way. So my wife said to me recently, because, it's stressful, right? You come home and, stressful, there's challenges, and not every day is great. She said, can't you just get a job where you can steer the ship straight and you don't have to make these changes? And I said, I don't think they're bringing in, leaders to do that, and I don't think I can do that at this point, So, as frustrating as it is sometimes, it's a lot more exciting.
Yeah, she'll be sick of you being bored if you were doing that, I'm sure.
Exactly.
So as we start to wrap up, I said that I was going to go back to a couple of questions related to your career journey, because you've just had such a broad and kind of deep set of experiences. I'd love to go a little bit more into kind of your philosophies or perspectives on how you've approached, and what have you brought to each role that's kind of stayed the same. I just wonder if you could share if there is things that you bring, regardless of what the position is, regardless of the challenge, that really shape how you approach a role or a project.
Yeah, I kind of think back and I say, like the commitment, the confidence. It's not easy. Like I said, there's frustrations, there's challenges, but I've done this for a while. I've taken my lumps. Not that the lumps are completely over, but this can be done. And I think that, exuding confidence, showing the competence is going to make it happen. When people see you, whether it's your team or others in the organization, if you demonstrate that, they're going to have confidence in you. They're going to feel good about it. And I think that's really important, being the face of the team, being the face of the organization. The other thing is being flexible. So, sometimes you got to know when to strike and when to kind of hold back a little bit. So, for example, it's early days with us, and there's been a number of people that have left the organization. So even with GEP, we're a bit lean. So I'm not one to all of a sudden, issue a mandate, issue policies. You have to do this. Yeah. You're asking for trouble. So, we had some very specific discussions. One was with the IT leadership team. Sat down, talked about their strategy, talked about the big 5, efforts, initiatives that they're leading. And then we also took a look at, this 80% of the transactional work that flows through that we're processing that doesn't add value. And we're doing a pilot, pretty straightforward. We're doing a pilot with them, and there's governance around that. And saying, for these particular types of requirements, even if they're small, as long as they don't fit into some of the bigger efforts, there's going to be a process around it. It's going to be a very fast flow. But we're going to actually partner on the bigger things. And I'll tell you, it changed the entire dynamic with them because we were looked at as a bottleneck because we had to touch everything, even, nitpicking certain things. And I'll tell you, that opened up the door. And then the other thing is not all the other functions are aware of us, know the capabilities we have, know the direction we're headed in. So sometimes they come, and it's a done deal. It's after the fact. And normally I would say, go away, right? We can't offer any value. Sometimes they'll say, it's a done deal. We selected the supplier, negotiated. Like, what can we do for you? Well, sharpen their pencil. And I'm like, well, we're not pencil sharpeners. So, but it is, doing a little PR. So I think that selling the group, doing that PR, even if there aren't savings, even if there isn't value, is going to go a long way. So I think it's, again, the approach you take, the confidence, which, again, goes back to the team that my team knows I have their back. My team knows that my success or failure is based upon them more than me. I can provide them the support, and and they know that. And the aspirational goals, I tell them, I said, you're going to hit them. You're going to hit them. And then, how you operate, across the organization is key. Doesn't mean it's not going to be, without conflict. Like I said, choose your battles. There are absolutely, there's one going on right now. I'm going hard. It's kind of the nature of the situation. There's going to be conflict. I tell my team that at the end of the year, if you have a performance review and you get 360 feedback and everybody loves you, it's probably a problem. There's, through the year, you're going to have conflict. It's how you work through it. But, it's kind of the nature of how, how we're expected to do things and deliver.
And challenge,
but again, that how
push change.
Is critical.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, my last question today, and thank you very much, Brian, for the time that you've spent with me, is just if there's one small habit that you think about that you do that has really made an impact, or you believe it's made a real big impact on your career.
I think just getting with the team, walking around, and it wasn't always like that. I remember, back earlier in my career, there was a woman that worked, in my group, and like my team was in an L shape, and I always took the shortest route, to go to the meetings. Yep. And she told me, she said, down this little aisle here, you have half your team, and if you walk down here and say hi, it might be really good. Me, head down, charge into meetings, but it was so obvious and so basic. So it's not forced, but spending time with people, whether it's popping into their office in the morning, walking around, having lunch, doing whatever, taking an interest in what they do, it means a lot. It's because there's so many meetings and let's hit the targets and where you are on your project. But getting to know your team, spending time with them is a habit that I learned, and it's genuine. That goes the longest way.
Yeah, it's so easy to be caught up in your own world that you don't really, it's not necessarily deliberate, but you just don't even think about what's outside of your own head at that moment in time. I can completely resonate with the trying to find the shortest route to a meeting room and keeping your head down all the way there, so you focus on what you're focused on.
Every day is a busy day, and it's back to back. And the other thing that's interesting I discovered early on, and I had a good boss that kind of showed me this, and only by his actions, not by his words, was that when I was working on a category, working with suppliers, I was the owner. I was a decision maker as far as that supplier was concerned, and regardless of what checkpoints or meetings I had to have internally. So I operate that way. I mean, I love to meet with suppliers. There's always top-to-tops and things like that. I love them when it's just a nice, happy, friendly conversation. But, in terms of my team, they own the supplier relationships. They make the decisions. This kind of positioning of title and this and that and doing end rounds, I abhor that. So, and I think that's another thing, too, with the team is that, hey, give you the support, we'll do our whatever sign-offs and approvals and all that, but, you're the face. The suppliers are not going to, do an end round if that's what they want to do. But that, I think, established the relationship much stronger, because the people that really are vested in that particular area are going to work together and sort things out.
Well, Brian, I don't want to keep you late for your next commitment, so I just have the easy question at the end, which is, once again, thank you so much. But if any listener would like to reach out, get in touch, where's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And, I think that's always the best way to, stay connected. And I certainly have some good roles out there. I'm recruiting. So a little plug there that, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on our website, it's certainly going to come my way, and we're always looking for talent. So, happy to hear from people.
Perfect. Well, what I'll do then, I'll include your LinkedIn profile, but I'll also include a link to your careers site as well, so that folks can directly click and look through what openings you have available. And I'll put those in the show notes for today's episode. So that's artofprocurement.com/Brian Bancroft 2018. And if you just go to the Art of Procurement homepage, you'll see that as as you look through all the episodes that have been published. But that's artofprocurement.com/Brian Bancroft 2018. One last time, Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
All right, take care. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.